Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Andrews. I direct the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William & Mary Law School. This is our second online webinar in lieu of our usual full-day conference. So thank you for joining us in this novel new format that we're pursuing. We have wonderful speakers lined up for the day. And I'd like to introduce first our new dean of the law school, Ben Spencer. He came to us this summer in the midst of a pandemic, so you know he's a brave person already. And we are so glad to have him here this morning to welcome you. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And on behalf of William & Mary Law School, America's first law school, I'd like to extend a hearty welcome to all of you who are tuning into this webcast. And I want to give a special welcome and note to thanks to our distinguished officials that we have participating in this event. Later on today, of course, we'll hear from the governor, and I want to thank Admiral Ann Phillips, who's a special assistant to the governor, for being here, and to Matthew Strickler, the Secretary of Natural Resources, who will be joining us later, and also to other distinguished guests from the General Assembly. We really appreciate your participation and are greatly looking forward to hearing your remarks today. This is really an extremely important and timely topic. And so we're very happy and proud that we at William & Mary Law School can be some small part of facilitating this discussion. So thanks to all of you for joining us, and I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth right now.
Thank you, Dean Spencer. And as he just said, we are so happy to be able to host this. The theme today is the outlook for resilience in the Commonwealth in 2021, and we're excited. We're going to kick off the day. Dean Spencer already mentioned that we have so many wonderful guests joining us today to talk about what we can look forward to in the coming year. We're going to kick off with Admiral Ann Phillips, the Special Assistant to the Governor for Coastal Adaptation and Protection. Ann has been a big supporter of our conferences. I really appreciate it. Prior to joining the Northam administration, she did work to address sea level rise and climate change at the national, local, regional, state, international level. She has all kinds of experience, and she had an active duty career for 31 years with the Navy. So we are very lucky that she brought her leadership and her expertise to Virginia to help us. So please join me in welcoming Admiral Phillips to give us an update on the Northam administration's coastal resilience efforts. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And if you all bear with me just a short minute, I'm going to share my screen, which could get exciting, but we'll see how it goes. Here we go. All right. And into, there we go. Great, excellent. So I think I'm going into presentation mode. There it goes. All right, everybody. Technology has been vanquished temporarily. So thank you, Elizabeth, very much for your kind introduction. And to Dean Spencer, thank you, sir, for joining us this morning. Welcome also to our guests we will have later on in this 2-hour period, Speaker Filler Corn, Senator Hanger, and we hope Senator Lewis, Delegate Hodges, who's already joined us, and Delegate Converse Fowler. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being with us. And of course, Secretary of Natural Resources, Matthew J. Strickler, and Governor Ralph Northam will join us later as well. I'm honored to be here again under different circumstances to participate in the 8th annual 3-part web-based Virginia Coastal Policy Center annual conference. My discussion this morning is, of course, focused on coastal resilience, although I think you'll find the discussion is going to look more broadly at resilience across Virginia. A couple updates from the past year. Certainly, from a year ago, we were signing Executive Order 45, setting standards for sea level rise preparedness planning and for building elevations for state-owned buildings. And fast forwarding to today, where we are talking about building capacity and moving forward for the Commonwealth. So you're going to hear some exciting things later on. But just to cap some of the things that my office has been doing for this year, you know, last year I spoke about testifying before Congress several times. That continued. Spoke again before the House Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee on Water Resources Development and the Environment, and also testified before the Senate Special Committee on the Climate Crisis, and provided input to the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis before everything shut down for COVID, which turned out to be good timing to focus on our master plan framework, which you will hear more about later. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the tremendous actions of localities, though. Just a few over the past year. You're looking at on the screen this morning at a recent picture from last week of the Chesterfield Heights project, which is now well underway in Norfolk. Lots of great work going on there. Also in Hampton, LaSalle Avenue, they're working with an Office of Economic Adjustment grant there, post JLUS. Hampton's working forward with their environmental impact bond structure. Virginia Beach has approved their sea level wise plan and is moving forward. The Middle Peninsula has launched their Fight the Flood program. And so all of these are indicators of the incredible innovation, dedication, and diligence that localities across coastal Virginia, and there are many others going on. When you name somebody always says, why didn't you mention me? In the interest of time, that's what we're talking about this morning. But with help and creative work with state agency grants, working with coastal zone management, with NOAA, with VZEM, with the BRIC grant, which is coming, I think we have lots of opportunities to move forward for the Commonwealth in that context. I also would like to thank my fellows. As many of you know, I don't have any permanent staff, but have been supported over the past year by a number of excellent fellows. First, for my part-time fellows, I had Erin Bartes with me this summer. She was a VASEM, Virginia Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine fellow. And I was also joined by Ryan Franklin, Leon Fields, and over the course of the summer, R.K. Arvind, who were sponsored by a joint effort between the Whole of Government Center here at William & Mary and the Coastal Policy Center. Thank you to all of them for their tremendous work, and to VCPC and the Whole of Government Center for sponsoring them. I've also had a Virginia Management Fellow for 8 months of this year. She's just left us, Elizabeth Spach. And my Trustee Sea Grant Fellow from last year, Ben Nettleton, is still with us, thanks to a little bit of extra money from the Sea Grant and from Secretary Strickler. Ben will depart in a month in mid-November. And a returning face, who some of you know, Sheree Zhang, who was a summer Sea Grant Fellow last year. She's joining us for a year. Sheree's already on board. And if you're counting noses, the only one who will be left by the end of mid-November is Sheree. So it'll be Anne and Sheree moving forward from there. Also, can't do anything without the partnership of CCRFR, VIMS, VCPC as mentioned, Sea Grant, Coastal Zone Management, William & Mary's Whole of Government Center, Wetlands Watch, and many state agencies are kind of now joining the fray here to make progress for resilience and across the Commonwealth. So priorities. We've talked about refining our priorities and our objectives over time. Many of you have seen this slide, some have not. But first and foremost, acknowledge climate change, take advantage of the best possible science and engineering to make decisions. Focusing on natural and nature-based solutions as the first line of defense, aligning state agency programs where possible, and collaborating across programs regionally and locally to build cost-effective solutions. That's an objective, that's a goal. Environmental justice and equity is a recurring theme that must run through all of our actions. It has been, it will continue to, particularly as we move forward over the next year, because the people who need help and assistance and to build the capacity the most often have the least opportunity to access anything that will help them do that. And it's our responsibility at the state level to ensure that equitable access is available. Finally, our challenges, of course, and this is a continued effort to integrate resilience broadly throughout and across state agencies and processes, and then to do our best, as I've mentioned briefly earlier, to align federal, state, and local grant program objectives so that we can take the best possible advantage of those opportunities. More and more federal grant programs talk about each other. When you hear a BRIC conversation, it usually involves some discussion with NOAA or alliance with NOAA, alignment with NOAA, and their grant programs, and I think we're going to see more and more that we want, federal grant programs want to see you having a building block process where you can use one to help with another and help with another. So resilience needs remain the same. Some of you have seen me talk about this many times, but for those who have not, there are a lot of objectives across the Commonwealth that we're trying to pull together here in the context of ensuring not only that we're working with the best possible science and engineering, but that we have the best possible data and that it is updated. So we are a part of a Department of Transportation Federal Highway Administration pooled funding request with Delaware, North Carolina, and Maryland to update our portion of Atlas 14. If we can pull this off, it will become Atlas 14 Volume 13. This is the federal standard. This is the basis for FEMA flood maps, probable maximum precipitation work, which is related to dam safety. It's the basis for stormwater calculations. And we know here in the Commonwealth, it is not accurate. So we need to update it. There is legislation at the federal level. Some of you are probably aware of this, but we don't know what will happen with that. And so we have an opportunity here ourselves to make some progress. the cost is about $405,000 over 2 years. Would be a lot more if we tried to go it alone. So let's take this opportunity and make this happen. We're also working on predictive rainfall projections. That's a need statewide. The Bay program is doing this for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We are working with them to try to find a way to piggyback on that effort and do the entire Commonwealth, which will add great value, I think, to localities statewide. If we have an opportunity to do the whole state, we should do it. And that will lead to our ability to perhaps achieve predictive floodplain mapping. As you all are aware, we do not have a full riverine and coastal gauge system. We need that. VDAM runs a portion of a gauge system statewide, IFLOS, but it is not statewide. We have a portion of a coastal system down in Hampton Roads, but somehow we have to pull these things together. And then as we move forward, we know we need a full coastal assessment and analysis upon which we will base the outcomes so that we can prioritize and develop a master coastal resilience plan and process and sort out how we can achieve consistent and dedicated funding. So building capacity. In the few minutes I have remaining here, we've focused on, now that we have some opportunities to build capacity, and meaning money, which you'll hear more of from Secretary Strickler later, thanks to legislation passed during this 2020 session of the General Assembly, we can start to reach out and do some of these things that we have heretofore only been able to talk about doing. And I'd like to add in that context that the Coastal Zone Management Program this year through Section 309 funding, working with the 8 coastal planning districts, which they convene regularly and which their grant processes have supported all along in a collaborative, cooperative environment. This year, they've committed to funding the 8 coastal planning districts and regional commissions, a total of $720,000 over the next 3 years of the Section 309 grant to provide assistance to further their coastal resilience planning, which will also help with Virginia, with the Commonwealth, developing a master plan. That is one example of building capacity, but we have so much more that we need to do there. And in the context of understanding some of the needs and the challenges that we have as we work towards developing our master plan and framework, we asked the Commonwealth Center for Recurrent Flooding Resilience to do a little work for us, particularly focusing on nuisance flooding. So I know some of you are aware this report is out, but just for those who are not, the website is down there at the bottom. You can go to CCRFR's reports site, and you can pull up this excellent report done by George McLeod, Emily Steinhilber, and Professor Tom Allen, looking at recurrent flooding risk for coastal Virginia using new data from NOAA that overlays nuisance flood data with existing known sea level rise. They based this off NOAA's 2017 intermediate high projection and created overlays for 2040, 2060, and 2080, which show impacted land area, impacted parcels, impacted buildings, and impacted roads. And so this is really excellent information that we hope the localities can make use of. This is the kind of thing you will find. It comes with a viewer. This is the viewer. I chose Norfolk because I live there, and blew out the side piece a little bit so you could see it better. But when you're looking at this is a 2060 projection for Norfolk. If it's red, it's an impacted by sea level rise. If it's gold, it's a tidal nuisance flood event on top of that. And then yellow would be a moderate flood event, a Cat 1 or Cat 2, probably Cat 1 or a nor'easter type storm. So please take a look at this. You can shift back and forth to 2040, 2060, or 2080 and see what the impact will be for your area if you're in coastal Virginia. It is readily available now. One more thing to talk about in the context of building capacity for localities. Thanks to MRISA, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments effort, which we are a part of, and which is now statewide, by the way. They used to only work in the Bay watershed, but now thanks to Professor Molly Mitchell at VIMS, they are looking at all of Virginia. Molly and the MRISA folks and Molly's extension, there Ben Watson at VIMS, have worked on the Community Climate Outlook sheets. You're seeing an example here. If you go to the website below, you'll see one for each locality in coastal Virginia. Please take a look. This is a beta test. They'd like to know what you want to see as a locality and how this kind of information can help you over time, what kinds of things will help you in your future planning. So as I conclude here this morning, thank you for the opportunity to talk very briefly. We were fortunate that we didn't see this kind of flooding in La Valette Avenue this year with the king tide, which was last weekend, but over the next year, building capacity, to give localities, communities, regions what they need, and have the Commonwealth develop what they need through a master planning process for the benefit of adapting and protecting coastal Virginia. Thank you very much. Elizabeth, back to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Admiral Phillips. If you all could please post if you have any questions for the Admiral in the Q&A box. Our Zoom webinar format unfortunately doesn't allow for interaction from panelists, so please post questions you have. And there are a couple of questions about the links that you included in your PowerPoint that flew by so quickly, they noted. So I do want to note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the VCPC website along with the PowerPoint, so we can get them that way as well. And then perhaps Admiral Phillips, after you're done speaking, also could post a couple of those links if you'd be willing, of things that you noted. That would be really helpful. I would like to ask you one question that unfortunately the speaker is not going to be able to join us for questions as well. She has a very packed schedule. So there's a question in the Q&A box for the speaker that I think I'm going to ask you, Admiral Phillips, which is, studies have shown that managed retreat, or a less inflammatory term might be strategic or planned relocation, can be the most equitable and least expensive in the long run policy. Hugely physically and culturally disruptive, right? But is that something that the state would consider looking at as you develop this first coastal resilience master plan?
Yes, it is. And people often ask me that. I've had people ask me directly, are you going to talk about managed retreat? We're talking about strategic coastal relocation, but there are circumstances where staying is going to cost a whole lot more than leaving. And the challenge there is, yes, it is culturally challenging. Yes, it is economically costly, but it is less costly than trying to protect every square inch of Virginia's coast, which we know we will not be able to do. So it gets to strategic planning through localities and regions, but we do intend to include that in our choices of outcomes. And the challenge there is, what choices and solutions do you give property owners, communities, localities, regions, to help them consider this as an option and to plan for it? And I think you'll be hearing more about that and seeing a little bit more as a master framework comes forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Second question for you. The Virginia Clean Energy Summit this week addresses efforts to mitigate climate change. This Coastal Resilience Master Plan will address efforts to adapt to climate change. Do we expect to see a comprehensive climate resilience plan for the state sometime/when?
That is an excellent question. And something that I do talk about from time to time. There is absolutely a need for a full climate resilience plan for the Commonwealth. My answer is typically, okay, one step at a time. And this step is towards coastal resilience, but that is, the more discussion about that, the better. The more that topic is brought up, the better. The Commonwealth has done a climate resilience plan. Was done under then Governor Kane, and it was updated to some extent under Governor McAuliffe, very much focused on energy. But the broader resilience impacts are certainly there across agriculture, across health, across all kinds of scientific endeavors. And so there is definitely a need to look at resilience more broadly across the Commonwealth for all of the regions of the Commonwealth in the context of our changing climate.
Thank you. Okay. Another question for you. Could you talk a bit more about the link between inland flooding and resilience planning? How is the state considering this issue?
So I focus on coastal adaptation and protection. However, many of the things that you just saw me talk about, those needs for data, those are statewide needs. Those are flooding needs across the Commonwealth. You're going to hear more about legislation towards the end of this webinar from Secretary Strickler, who will talk about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, which is a statewide fund looking at flood preparedness. And so that gets to the resilience perspective of the interest in a climate resilience plan for the Commonwealth. There's also resilience plan for the Commonwealth, which certainly needs to be a statewide effort, not just coastal focus. Within the coast, though, we have plenty of riverine and other flooding. not necessarily tied to the Chesapeake Bay watershed in some areas. So that Northern Virginia is one. Yes, the streams all dump into the Potomac River, which dumps into the bay, but a lot of the challenges up there are not necessarily, there are certainly sea level rise challenges, but there are many more intense rainfall, stream flow challenges that are creating big problems in that part of coastal Virginia. They're also creating big problems in the Crater Planning District region. And that is why getting this intensity, duration, and frequency work done for the bottom third of the Commonwealth of Virginia, piggybacking on the Chesapeake Bay work, will be of tremendous assistance to us, because some of the biggest flooding problems we have are in that Danville, Martinsville, South Boston, Bristol, that region of the Commonwealth. So it is, my job is to focus on coastal adaptation and protection, but I keep, wading, if you will excuse the pun, into statewide needs, because it turns out what's coastal needs are often statewide, and there's we have an opportunity now to improve the situation for everybody. We need to take it.
And thank you for the
Quote on this slide: "Time and tide, and
Yeah.
riverine flooding, wait for no man."
That's right. And so one of the difficulties, obviously, is that it's a lot to take on, right? I mean, this is the first time the Commonwealth has done this. And so funding is a big issue. As you noted, you don't have a huge staff. I don't know if there's any hope on the horizon long-term for funding these efforts as we develop a full-blown master plan.
I know Secretary Strickler will talk more about this too, so I don't want to steal his thunder, but there are several specific references within the House Bill 981 that talk about being able to use some of those funds under the principles and guidelines that will be developed for them for studies of statewide significance, scientific studies of statewide significance, and research or data needs to meet research and data needs to help build capacity and provide background that localities need to better improve their planning and their preparation for flooding challenges. So there's an opportunity there, certainly, that hasn't been there in the past. Some of the things that we're trying to work on, though, precede that. So that money won't appear until next year, early spring. If we want to get on board with the Chesapeake Bay program's IDF modeling, for example, we need to do that now. And I need to have the money posted to commit to updating Atlas 14 by April of next year. So, the clock is ticking in some cases, and that's a good thing, because that gives us opportunities to move forward.
Right. Well, we appreciate that it costs a lot and it takes so much time. Even this short presentation shows just how many people are working on this and how much time it takes to develop it and do it right. So we appreciate all of your efforts. And if anyone does have millions at your disposal that you just can't wait to get rid of, please consider the Commonwealth of Virginia as the takeaway from that. So I do want to note again that this recording will be posted on the VCPC website. And Anne, did you have all the links in the PowerPoint, or do we need to collect those separately? I don't recall if you had like the CCRFR report link in your slide. Because if not, we can put that in
the link shows in the slide, but it is not linked directly to the slide. So,
right.
So we can pull those
okay.
links up and post them.
Okay. Well, we'll look forward to hearing more about this, the Commonwealth's resilience efforts from Secretary Strickler later in the day. I don't see any other questions for you at the moment. So I do want to note that we have had a few people join us. I think we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty getting the speaker in. So I'm going to take this moment to say thank you to my Assistant Director, Angela King, and my student, Alston Underwood, for all of their assistance in putting this on today. It's a big help. I think that Angela, could you give us an update on the speaker? Is she able to join us? The joy of internet technology, everyone.
We are still waiting for her to join us.
Okay. So what we could do is go ahead and start, because we do have 3 of our esteemed panelists with us, the legislative panel. And unfortunately, I think we're going to need to do a little bit of juggling. If the speaker does join us, because she is on a very tight schedule, if we can work out the technological difficulties, then we may need to, interrupt and shift over. I hate to do that, but until I hear otherwise from her resolving this, I'm not sure that when she'll be joining. So this morning, we are so happy to host, we have a panel of 4 legislators. One legislator will be joining us a little late, I think, has another issue that he's having to deal with this morning, and that's Senator Lewis. So I'm going to go ahead and read all of the introductions, the bios now at one time, and then I will call on Senator Hanger to go first. Sorry, Senator Hanger. Not the worst.
Good morning.
Right. So just to quickly read the bios, Emmett Hanger, since 1983, has represented Virginia's 24th district, the Shenandoah region of Virginia, first in the House and now in the Senate. He has an impressive record working to address water quality issues in the Commonwealth, and he knows well the challenges facing our rural agricultural communities today. He serves on the Finance and Appropriations Committee and is a budget conferee. He's also a member of the Senate Agriculture, Conservation, and Natural Resources Committee and has been appointed to, among others, the Chesapeake Bay Commission and the Rappahannock River Basin Commission. Senator Hanger also is a former commander of the Harrisonburg National Guard and obtained the rank of captain in the U.S. Army as an infantry officer. With his record of leadership on natural resource issues, we are excited to hear today his perspective on resilience challenges in the Commonwealth. Delegate Kelly Converse Fowler, since 2018, has served in the House of Delegates representing District 21, which is the city of Chesapeake and part of Virginia Beach. Her legislative priorities include finding bipartisan solutions to improve coastal resiliency and prevent coastal flooding, fighting for a fair economy, good jobs, and a level playing field for working families, and expanding access to affordable healthcare and quality education regardless of sex, race, income, or background. She has been the patron of legislation requiring flood history disclosure a couple of times now, and I'm sure she will provide us with some insights about that today. Delegate Keith Hodges has been a member of the House since 2012, representing the 98th District in the Middle Peninsula, which is the counties of Essex, Gloucester, King and Queen, King William, Matthews, and Middlesex. He knows the concerns of rural coastal Virginia as they face the need to address both increasing flooding and water quality concerns with very limited resources. He was the patron of a piece of successful legislation last year that helps to address that lack of resources in rural communities. And hopefully, I think he's going to give us an update on implementation of that legislation today. He received a BS degree from the Medical College of Virginia School of Pharmacy in 1989, and he operates the Gloucester Pharmacy. Senator Linwood Lewis has represented District 6 in the Virginia Senate, which is Accomack County, Matthews County, and Northampton County, and part of Norfolk City and Virginia Beach since 2014. And before that, he served in the Virginia House of Delegates representing District 100 from 2004 till January 2014. He's an attorney who earned his BA from Hampton-Sydney College in 1984 and his JD from the T.C. Williams School of Law at the University of Richmond. He also serves on the Senate Agriculture, Conservation, and Natural Resources Committee and has been the patron of a number of pieces of legislation concerning resilience, including creating the Commonwealth Center for Recurrent Flooding Resiliency and the Virginia Shoreline Resiliency Fund, which was changed during this past session to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and positioned to hold revenue from Virginia participating in RGGI. So we hope he will give us an update on that exciting development as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Senator Hanger to start us. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and good morning to everyone. And I hope the technology is working here. I guess am I coming through okay?
Yes, sir.
Good, because I had an issue with my technology last night. My laptop got a virus or something, and it's repairing itself. It's been doing that for the last 2 hours, so I have to use my cell phone to communicate. But I certainly appreciate the invitation to be a part of this conversation today, a very important conversation. In fact, I was involved with another virtual meeting just prior to this. Actually, it was still going on. The governor was speaking, and he was saying nice things about my district. And I cut him off right in the middle of his comments so I could join you all here and hear the speaker. So
thank
I have
you.
to talk to the speaker about that. But at least I'm ready to go now, and I do have some prepared remarks, more or less, and I'll share those. And then certainly we would welcome a conversation with questions as they may present themselves. First, of course, as I sit here, I'm kind of up on a hilltop in the western part of the state. In Augusta County. And as I look out my window this morning, people are busy harvesting soybeans and corn, and the mountains are in view, the George Washington National Forest. And that is relevant to what you are talking about today, but I'm a legislator that is not in the coastal region. In front
Senator
of
Hanger, I hate to interrupt you, but the speaker has joined us. Do you think we could shift and come back to you? I'm so sorry to do that to you.
well, that's quite all right. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your understanding.
I'll go after her.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Thank you for joining us, Speaker Filler Corn. I'm glad we conquered our technological issues. I'm going to quickly introduce you and let you have the floor. We're so thrilled that you could be here with us today. It's my honor to introduce the first woman in the 400-year history of Virginia's legislature to hold the position of Speaker of the House of Delegates. Delegate Filler Corn rose to this role after representing the 41st House District for a decade, which is the fastest rise to the post of Speaker that we've had. The 41st District includes parts of Fairfax, Fairfax Station, and West Springfield. Speaker Filler Corn's career has been devoted to public service, and that passion for service shines through her truly tireless work to make the Commonwealth a better place to live, work, and raise a family. And prior to her election to the House, she also served Virginians across the Commonwealth in the administrations of Governors Warner and Kane. So we're thrilled to have her join us today to share her thoughts about resilience in the Commonwealth in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I apologize for whatever was going on. There's every once in a while in this new world we all live in, there's some technical issues, but I'm here and I appreciate Senator Hanger as well for his flexibility. So good morning, everybody. And I'm thrilled to be here. I want to thank my good friend, Elizabeth Andrews, and the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at the William & Mary Law School for having me and having the opportunity to share a little bit about the future of climate change and resiliency. During our legislative session each year, I've had the distinct pleasure of meeting Elizabeth's impressive students from VCPC, and I enjoy it every year. And all I have to say to you all is that you are truly the future of our Commonwealth and our nation, and thank you for what you're doing. So I'm going to start with what I think is not really a controversial statement, or at least shouldn't be controversial at all. Climate change is the biggest threat that we face to our economic future, our health, our safety, and the way we live our lives. I know for those of you participating in this event, this is a statement that is probably more fact than it is controversial, but it's worth repeating as often as possible. And the facts are clear. In 2014, global sea level was 2.6 inches above the 1993 average. And the United States Geological Survey estimates that the sea level rise of 10 meters will displace approximately 25% of the United States population, and that even a 1 meter rise will cause severe flooding in cities located on coasts. It's estimated that Virginia has the highest rate of relative sea level rise on the East Coast. Recurrent flooding remains a significant issue in Virginia coastal localities, especially, as we know, in Hampton Roads. These issues affect all aspects of life in the Commonwealth: the economy, the port, tourism, attracting new businesses, the bay's seafood industry, food and water supply, and most importantly, a healthy population. We've also seen storms at a rate and with strength that we have never seen before. So far this year, it's been the second most active Atlantic hurricane season on record, only trailing that of 2005. It's also only the second time we've had so many storms that the National Hurricane Center has had to use the Greek letter storm naming system. The cost of preparedness and response to these storms, both from a financial perspective, but also from a human perspective, of displacements, destruction, injury, loss of life, continues to mount. For too long, the response to this emergency from Virginia's legislature and government was at best limited, and at worst exacerbated by the causes of global warming and coastal flooding. Legislative efforts to reduce carbon emissions were easily defeated in favor of efforts to expand or revive the fading energy industries that contribute to global warming. Administrations in the past would focus efforts more on fighting with Washington about offshore drilling prohibitions rather than focusing on efforts on offshore wind or investments in solar energy. And we are not that far removed from a time when candidates running for governor were actually climate deniers. In fact, they actively sued the University of Virginia, trying to prosecute scientists who spoke out about the dangers of global warming. Over the past several years, Governors McAuliffe and Northam have worked diligently with executive agencies and environmental boards and commissions to be as aggressive as possible to make Virginia a global leader in coastal resiliency and reducing carbon emissions. They have done what they have been able to do, including the governor's executive order increasing the resilience to sea rise. Unfortunately, efforts to join RGGI or efforts to truly limit carbon emissions were aggressively thwarted by the legislature, and to the extent that any governor was able to make progress on this issue was limited. Last year, Democrats took control of both the House and the Senate, promising a strong plan to combat climate change and promote sustainable energy production. This was the first time since 1993 that Democrats had a trifecta in the state, control of both bodies of the legislature and the governor's office. So leading into the 2020 session, Democrats were laser focused to put the Commonwealth on a path to reduce carbon emissions, respond to the realities of climate science, and make investments in renewable energy production as a way to create jobs and boost the economy. Where the state's default energy position had previously been coal, gas, and oil production, now we have a majority looking at solar and wind as the state's future. Important steps were taken to address climate change and coastal resiliency during the 2020 regular session. Virginia became the first Southern state to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, and pass the Clean Energy and Community Flood Preparedness Act. We implemented policies to reduce our carbon footprint, including mandating a zero-emission electricity sector by 2015 through the passage of the VCEA, Virginia Clean Economy Act. We addressed coastal flooding by passing the Virginia Natural Coastal Protection Act, SB 776, and measures to protect the Chesapeake Bay, HB 504. The 2021 and 2022 biennial budget approved in March made the historic investment of over $240 million to improve water quality across the Commonwealth, because clean water and a healthy environment are a priority for all Virginians. Although due to the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, some of the spending for the new programs were frozen. We intend to restore those investments and continue to achieve the goals of protecting a healthy and natural environment. So that brings us now to where we are. But there's so much more that we can and that we will be doing to continue this work. Together, working with so many of the presenters already that have presented in your program today and will continue to do so later, and also you'll be hearing from Governor Northam, we are going to continue to build on the work that we have accomplished last session. That's a commitment. As we prepare for the session in January, there'll be three main focuses for continuing down this path of making Virginia's economy greener and more sustainable, as well as reducing carbon emissions and improving coastal resiliency. As I mentioned, understanding the Commonwealth's fiscal health to determine the ways we can continue to invest in resiliency, what funds can be reallotted, and what our priorities are going forward. 2, next, reviewing the work that we accomplished last session and understanding what changes we need to make this session. 3, last is examining other areas that affect our climate directly and indirectly, more specifically transportation. Many of our priorities that we're discussing today and that you will continue to discuss stem from what we can invest in the budget. As I mentioned earlier, we invested $240 million into clean water efforts this past session. And unfortunately, that money was removed as a result of the budget shortfall caused by COVID. So first and foremost, our focus needs to be continued response to the COVID pandemic. The key to getting our economy back on track is keeping our citizens safe, protecting jobs, protecting businesses, and putting Virginia on a path back to where we were in March when we adjourned sine die prior to the COVID-19 crisis. These problems were caused by the pandemic. We just wrapped up a special session addressing COVID and criminal justice reform, and we'll be receiving the governor's amendments to the budget soon. After that, believe it or not, we will immediately begin working yet again on our budget for January. This means reforecasting of our revenues to determine the Commonwealth's fiscal health. It is my belief and my hope that this reforecast will show that Virginia is well along the path to recovery. We have done a really, truly great job in quickly responding to COVID-19 pandemic, which will help tremendously in this recovery. From there, we'll then be able to determine what investments we can continue to make in clean water and making sure that we are providing the financial support necessary to invest in building a green economy in the Commonwealth. Investments like ensuring we have clean water and a healthy Chesapeake Bay, and increases to the Virginia Shoreline Resiliency Fund. Earlier this year, we passed the most progressive budget in the Commonwealth's history, including aggressive funding to combat climate change and to conserve our natural resources. We are working to get there again. In one session, Virginia went from one of the worst states in the country to one of the best states in the nation on tackling climate change and reducing carbon emissions, something we're so proud of. A big part of that was the VCEA, Virginia Clean Economy Act. Now that we've passed these historic efforts, we're going to need to follow the changes through the regulatory process and see the effects once they're implemented. I would expect that throughout the course of the session, we'll work hand in hand with Governor Northam's administration to ensure that we smooth out any of the bumps in the road as we strive to get full implementation of RGGI and the Clean Economy Act to ensure their effectiveness. Additionally, we need to ensure that the costs associated with these efforts are not excessively burdening ratepayers. And we need to responsibly set the Commonwealth's policy on how investments in a green economy should be made. Part of this is ensuring that our policy decisions are made through the lenses of equity and environmental justice. A recent study by the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality determined that a cultural shift must take place. A focus on equity, a focus on justice must be prominent at every level of policymaking. Last year, the General Assembly spoke loud and clear. Virginia will be a national leader in the production of clean energy, and we want to make sure that the bills that we passed worked and are doing exactly that. As may have been discussed earlier, the administration continues to work through their timeline towards making the Commonwealth a full participant of RGGI. This is a top priority for them as well as for the legislature. So ensuring that there are no delays in that process will be critical. Lastly, I think there will also be a focus on what can we do to tackle the second leading cause of carbon pollution, more specifically transportation emissions. Last session, in a bill that I carried, we significantly increased funding for transit and rail, giving Virginians more options for travel, which will in turn reduce pollution and congestion on our roads and our highways. We need to continue those efforts to make public transportation more accessible and literally reduce the number of vehicles causing carbon emissions on our roadways. Additionally, I know many stakeholder groups are looking to what can they do? What can we do to reduce carbon emissions in the cars that we currently have on our roads? Obviously, this will be a contentious discussion as we forge a path forward. But looking ahead to next session, I think an innovative discussion will be, how can we reduce carbon pollution in our transportation sector? To wrap up, I think the coming year is going to focus more on implementation and improvement. I said this before, but it's worth repeating. In just the past few months, Virginia has gone from among the worst to one of the best on the issues of reducing carbon emissions. It will take a lot of time and effort to make sure we're doing this correctly while growing our economy along the way. We are committed to doing just that. While I'm incredibly proud of all that we've accomplished in such a short time frame, I'm also looking forward to continuing our work with stakeholders around the Commonwealth to make sure we get it right, building a better future for Virginia and for America. I want to thank all of you here today for helping in that effort. I know your passion. I know what you've done, and I know you'll continue to will work hard towards this goal. These are incredibly complex and really difficult issues. And I know at times it does feel overwhelming. But again, I remind you, look at what we've done in such a short time. We saw it during the General Assembly session, and I know the administration is seeing it now as they continue to work through these historic efforts. But it's worth it in the end because we cannot wait any longer. We can't delay action any further. And I know that next year we'll continue to build on the successes that we've had this past session. So again, thank you, Elizabeth and the Virginia Coastal Policy Center for having me today, for providing me the opportunity to share some remarks. And honestly, just thank you for your continued dedication and hard work on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker, very much. We really appreciate you being here, Madam Speaker. And I'm sure we will hear echoed in our other legislative speakers, the fiscal constraints issue and what we're facing in the Commonwealth. That I know that that's a very sobering thing as you all were working on a budget. Many things pulling at our revenue stream. So thank you again for being here. It is such a pleasure to host you. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to return to Senator Hanger, who gets the prize for patience and flexibility. Thank you for letting us switch around on you there, and we'll ask you to resume. And thank you again, Speaker Filler Corn.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. And again, I'm pleased for the invitation to share in the conversation. I was a bit confused there when you were trying to get my attention. I thought maybe something was messing up here on this end when you want to get the speaker in there, but I'm glad she was able to come on and that I wasn't doing something inappropriate here. So I'm good to go now. Again, thank you. And as I was stating before we turned to the speaker's remarks there, I'm of course situated this morning in Western Virginia up against the George Washington National Forest here, and very much in the middle of the agriculture production in the Commonwealth. So I'm the speaker this morning that's not from the coastal region, but very much involved with conservation from the headwaters, and certainly have been involved with the efforts statewide for quite a number of years. First got really involved with some of this back when I was a member in the Senate of the Commission on the Future of Virginia's Environment. And we did a lot of good work, I thought, in that commission, which has kind of laid a base for what we've been able to accomplish over the last 20 years. And also in that, Taylo Murphy, former delegate and Secretary of Natural Resources, got me aside and asked if I would be interested as a member of the Headwaters region rather than adjacent to the Chesapeake Bay, if I would want to serve on the Chesapeake Bay Commission. And I jumped at that opportunity. I've been very active with the Chesapeake Bay Commission now for about 17 years, I guess. And certainly in my tenure in the Senate, have been involved in a lot of these issues, not only the Chesapeake Bay Commission, but the Rappahannock River Basin Commission as well, where part of my district, in addition to west of the mountains, I have some areas east of the mountains over in Greene, Madison, Culpeper, in the Rappahannock River Basin, and have worked in leadership with that going back to when Rob Whitman was chairing that, and I had the opportunity to chair that on a couple of occasions. Well, I will just go through some prepared remarks here to kind of lay a base for the conversation with my viewpoint here of having worked on this a number of years. The effects of these changing climate conditions on the soil, on agriculture production, on water quality, is something that we've all been working on now for about 40 years. And I would suggest, we've had some increased focus, I suppose, in the last few years. But as I reflect back on 2000 to 2010, we had a real big push to try to meet our goals for the 2010 goals for the Chesapeake Bay. And it was a comprehensive plan statewide, involved a lot of land conservation efforts. In fact, during that period of time, I was a part and sponsored legislation to create the Land Conservation Foundation and the Virginia Land Conservation Tax Credit Program. And we've seen over the years that has been an integral part of our efforts to work in the areas of what we're now calling resiliency, but to provide appropriate land and water conservation, water quality improvement throughout the Commonwealth. Soil health. First, one of the things that we do know, and there's broad agreement, that it's regenerative agriculture practices are good for soil health and have significant benefits on reducing flooding. The region that I sit in here, we've had to deal with flooding issues here locally, and maintenance of flood control dams, which have a significant impact on the coastal region. as we deal with those issues here locally in the western part of the state. We've implemented a lot of best management practices in the agriculture sector to help with that. No-till reduces soil erosion and encourages water to infiltrate soils rather than rushing down the streams and flooding our rivers. Cover crops do the same and also reduce water pollution. Crop rotations and can lower pesticide use also, which is good for the environment. Different grazing practices now. We move cattle around, and we have created lagoons and limited use of fertilizers, and avoided overgrazing, which depletes the soil and, of course, increases the runoff. Those all have helped. Significantly, we've done a lot of work on stream exclusion, and that obviously was a topic of debate at this last session of the General Assembly, where we were looking at moving from voluntary practices for our farmers to potentially more restrictive regulations, and we opted to continue incentivizing voluntary practices for our farmers. And I think that's going to pay dividends in the long run. But we're getting good results from that. And quite frankly, we've stepped up and had significant dollars expended on behalf of best management practices for our farmers. I was a part a number of years ago of a publication of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. I chaired the group where we came up with the 6 most cost-effective methods for preventing pollution into the bay and helping with our water quality. And one that we eliminated after a lot of discussion was carbon sequestration. We at the top of our list was, our wastewater treatment plants. We've done a good job at the state and local level of dealing with that. That some of that is still ongoing, particularly in the Hampton Roads, the Tidewater, the eastern part of the state, where we still have some issues there with septic systems and the wastewater treatment facilities, but a lot of progress has been made there. The other were agriculture practices, which we're still working on and trying to adequately fund. The carbon sequestration is something we kind of put on the back burner at that time, but now carbon sequestration is something that's kind of been pushed to the front. Delegate Hodges, who's going to be a part of this conversation and currently chairs or has chaired the Rappahannock River Basin Commission, has been involved with that, as have I, going back to 2008, when we began our work on doing some projects with forestry that help particularly in the eastern part of the state. We've incentivized practices, so we're protecting riparian areas. Something that goes hand in hand with soil health are riparian buffers, and that's something that we're continuing to work on, which does have an impact on flooding, as well as significant water quality improvement. There's a large body of science that proves that the benefits of buffers. It includes protecting and building up soils, improving air and water quality, protecting farmland from flooding, and enhancing fish and wildlife habitat, and beautifying the landscape. And as I mentioned earlier, keeping livestock out of the streams has become one of our priorities. Virginia has worked for the past several years to enhance the flexibility that landowners have in agriculture cost share programs for buffers. And this flexibility, as we move into the future, will help to move this program forward as we seek to get compliance through voluntary rather than restrictive regulations. Protecting existing farmland is something that we also have been involved with for quite some time. And I've been pleased to be a part of that through the Land Conservation Foundation, through the Land Conservation Tax Credit Program, which has assisted farmers in maintaining their farms and continuing to farm. Sometimes we look at the issues related to farming and we view it as a problem, perhaps because of the agriculture runoff and the fertilizer runoffs and what have you. But the truth of the matter is, it's one of the best uses, properly managed, is one of the best uses for our land throughout the state. We are on a list of endangerment of farmland with the American Farmland Preservation Trust. They rate us in danger of losing farmland, and indeed we are losing farmland. I was involved with a task force on farmland preservation a number of years ago, and came down to Virginia Beach and celebrated with the mayor of Virginia Beach when they reached 5,000 acres below what they call the green line there in Virginia Beach of land that was conserved in agriculture production in the city of Virginia Beach. So those types of programs continue, and they're things that I think we need to continue to push. It is critical, as the speaker had indicated in her remarks, that we do better for water quality. Certainly maintaining agriculture and forest lands are a part of that complicated mix of things that we can do, and certainly is what I'm focused on here in this western part of Virginia. In conclusion, I would say that I've been involved at this for quite some time particularly during my tenure in the Senate in leadership positions. The speaker mentioned the budget. I was a part of the conference committee this past week where we finalized our negotiations, and I'm pleased to report actually that the administration and the leadership of the House and the Senate really placed as priority our funding for water quality improvement programs. So even as we certainly, I guess our top priority was healthcare in terms of putting money back in for mental health. But the governor this year is chairing the executive council for the Bay program and has been very supportive. So collectively, we actually restored significant funding to our water quality improvement programs and for land conservation in general. So I was pleased about that particular outcome. We just basically, we're up here on this side of the state. We've gotten a lot of rain, and as the speaker was talking about with climate change, I'm a Republican, so sometimes Republicans argue about the science, but I certainly am one, and I think you'll find most people that are on my side of the aisle, when presented with the evidence and the things that we need to do, will be supportive of working in a bipartisan manner to affect good results. The truth is that the seasons are changing. I'm observing the harvesting of corn and soybeans right now as we speak out my window. And but we've had a lot of rain, a lot of it over a lot of periods of time where there was additional flooding this year. Well, we're dealing with that with our flood control dams, and as I mentioned, with our best management practices. But it's something we do need to recognize that the climate is changing, and we need to adapt to that. One of the things I haven't mentioned that I think can help throughout the state, particularly in agriculture, is precision agriculture. Technology is a great benefit to us now in helping us not put farmers out of business, but reach our environmental goals at the same time that we can enhance the productivity of our farmers and work together to accomplish common goals. So I'll conclude with that, but certainly would be glad to participate in the conversation as it evolves.
Thank you, Senator Hanger. And for all the people who are watching, please put questions in the Q&A box, and I will swing back and ask the legislators the questions when they're all done. Senator Hanger, I will just say that my husband's from a farming family in Surrey, and they're having real problems with the cotton because of the rain. So I hear you on in trouble trying to harvest cotton too. All right, with that, we will go to Delegate Converse Fowler. Thank you.
Hi there. Okay, I think y'all can hear me. So thank you so much for having this. I'm going to share my screen because I think visually, I think there's some things that I could share that are very helpful. One second, let me just make sure I'm doing this right. All right, I'm going to assume everybody can see my screen. Okay. All right, great. All right, well, I'm Delegate Converse Fowler, and I want to thank you guys for doing this. I think it's really great, even though we can't meet in person. I think it's really helpful to still, and especially to provide the video, the recording after is going to be a great resource. And bringing everyone together, I think, is also very important. I'm going to talk a lot about getting a holistic picture of what we need in the state, and I think that's really important. So I was elected in 2017, but I am a real estate broker, and I'm previously a teacher. I used to teach elementary school. I want to give you a little bit of background on my district. So I think I'm just supposed to, okay. So this is my district, House District 21. It is mostly Virginia Beach, a little bit of Chesapeake. We have Stumpy Lake right in the center of my district. And you have a couple different watersheds that actually, you've got the water coming in from the Chesapeake Bay, and then you've also got the southern watershed. So it's a very diverse district with a lot of different things going on for a lot of different reasons. And I think my district kind of is a good example of that. The biggest issue that my district faces and that Hampton Roads is facing is flooding. So when I got involved, and this is 2016, this is Hurricane Matthew. This is a house that I sold and that flooded during Hurricane Matthew. This is just one example. When this happened, I sold this house, just to give some background on it, we didn't know it was in a flood zone. We didn't know it required flood insurance until about 2 days before closing. So this is a military family who already had their heart set on this house, already has their loan approved. And for some reason, it took till the very end before the flood insurance was flagged. So it came up and they said, all right, this is going to cost you about $100 and something more a month, which they could afford. It was they could get approved for. It wasn't in their budget though. They knew that they were going to be paying about maybe $1,200 a month. And all of a sudden now we're over $1,300 a month. That's a big difference for a family. So not only was the cost an issue, then it was the issue of, well, now you also have to prepay your first year of flood insurance at closing. So you need to come up with an extra $1,200. I think it was $1,300 at closing. So that was also an issue that we had to troubleshoot. Did they even really have a choice to move ahead? Contractually, no. They could afford it, so they had to move ahead. This is a big problem, not to know till the last minute that, do you want to live in a flood zone or do you not want to live in a flood zone? And do you know that any sooner? So this is how I kind of started getting involved. One area of flooding. They were there all night. The water came up, and there's no picture of it, but it did come up above the electrical outlets. It's a ranch, as you can see, and a family of 4 at the time with the kids, everybody in the master bedroom on the bed while the waters rose. And there was no hope of getting out. And that was really scary. And we have become friends. So we were texting at the time, and I was really concerned that how are you going to get out of this house as the waters rose, and we didn't know how high they were going to rise before they went back. It's just a very scary thought when you don't have a choice, and there really wasn't a lot of warning. So this brings me to legislation. So then I was elected in 2017, and I actually could really get started on making some changes and getting some work done. And this is where my expertise from real estate comes in. This was a bill I had in 2019, and it was HB 2175, and it required disclosure of a special flood hazard area. So to know that up front is kind of critical to be able to know right from the get-go. But it did fail to pass. We did add some language into Senator Vogel's bill, SB 1292, that actually flagged, at least we were flagging it, saying in the disclosures that buyers see when they go to buy a property, it says, okay, this is where you would find the information about a flood zone, versus getting the actual flood zone. At least it was being flagged, so at minimum. So my issue with that though, this is what this looks like. So when you think about getting a disclosure, this disclosure is 4 pages long. It's got different things on it that are buyer beware. These are things that you have to look for. And this is as agents and brokers that we have to advise our clients on. There's all kinds of things they have to do. They have to disclose that you have to find out yourself. You have to go look for sex offenders yourself. You have to look for your flood hazard zone yourself. If it's in a dam break zone, you have to look for that yourself. How do they find that? A lot of the times, this information of how you find it is not there, but we did put in here where you find this information. At least they have to go look at the FEMA site. Now, I did have a link to the FEMA site. If you go to the FEMA site, I challenge you to go find your flood zone on the FEMA site. It's very difficult. So I don't think this is sufficient at all. Additionally, not only is this not sufficient, if you notice there's nowhere to sign. Do you sign this anywhere? No, you don't acknowledge that you received it at all. What you do get is this form that says that the purchaser is advised of the disclosures listed on that disclosure on this website. So this was actually changed last year, slightly. We were hoping for more. I wanted it disclosed. I wanted this to be included in the other form and says, here, you have to have a copy of it. And here is where you sign receiving the copy. I'm not sure why we have to do it separately. And we thought the language would cover that. And it used to say the purchaser is described. I think the word of was what changed. And this just is not sufficient. Who is getting a copy of this? So there's two parts to that to fix. Now, also in 2020, we had HB 858 requiring disclosures of a special flood hazard zone. And I also stormwater maintenance facilities, including repair. Those are those ponds that are in the areas that you see that collect the stormwater. And it's still a buyer beware though. So you still are not told specifically if you're in a flood hazard zone. We tried, it didn't pass. So if you look at the language, if they have actual knowledge, the property is located in one or more special flood hazard zones, the owner shall provide to the buyer a written disclosure that states the information. We really, this is not asking too much. This is really just kind of like where those of you who may know, when you go to buy a house or you rent, you will get a disclosure that says you are in what noise zone you're in for the aircrafts and also the crash zone. This is very similar, but we all have to really push for this just to be able to get this. Okay, there was a really large pushback on this with realtors, which I am a realtor, but we need to really get the stakeholders involved to know exactly what this is, what it entails, and how it is helpful in the beginning to know what flood zone you're in. Try and go a little faster. I know oh no, it's not working. Okay. So future flood disclosure efforts, we're in the process now of crafting legislation for 2021, revisiting the special flood hazard area legislation, including flood history on properties. So this has come up a lot. We need to talk more about how we get that flood history on a property. So when you go to buy this house that you see in the pictures had flooded, are you going to know it flooded ahead of time to make that an educated decision? So, but we have to take steps here. First step would be just knowing the zone and knowing if it is in a flood zone ahead of time before you already are locked in that contract or that rental to know that you are going to flood. I think it's a proper disclosure. So we are falling behind on a national scale in terms of our flood disclosure policies. Importance of knowing this ASAP before it's far into the home buying process. We've already kind of covered that, but I can't stress that enough before you're already in the process, and also renting to know if you should buy proper rental insurance to cover your flooding, because it is not covered in rental insurance. And we have a high military population where we're at. And when you're moving from place to place, you should know what you're getting into before we wake up and you're flooded. We will need a lot of support to introduce anything related to flood disclosures because we've already had the pushback. We really need the support there, and to know we can get this, ahead of time, get this covered. So also real quick, I know I'm running out of time, but we want to be able to, this year, another resiliency effort. I know I talked a lot about disclosures, but smart scale. We are drafting legislation, including resilience in the categories used to rank the funding. Flooding to the Commonwealth's definition of resiliency in the code is also a piece of that. So utilizing the joint subcommittee, which I've newly been appointed on, is going to be essential and key. The subcommittee has done such good work already, and I'm ready to kick it into high gear, and let's really get a holistic picture of the things that we need to do in the Commonwealth that really attack the flooding problem from all angles. So now that it's been a priority by the administration and in the House and in the Senate, I think we can really get some good work done. And I just want to thank everybody. I was trying to meet the time, but if there's questions, I am here to help and answer. And I hope this opens up the conversation a little more, especially the visuals, to see what flood disclosures look like.
Yeah, that was terrific. Thank you very much. I'm glad you shared that. So we're going to move on to Delegate Hodges and then do questions at the end, because I am getting some really interesting questions for all of you all in Q&A box. So Delegate Hodges, thank you.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for the invitation to speak today at Virginia's first Coastal Resilience Webinar. Thank you for all you and your team do. It's always been a pleasure to work with you, even going back to your days at DQ. So we've always enjoyed working with you. And when we look at resilience, I'd like to bring this up. It's the process of adapting well in the face of adversity. So, like today, we primarily talk about resiliency with regard to flooding and sea level rise, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about resiliency in a different way, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. Now, I represent the 98th District. It's Virginia's Middle Peninsula, 1,000 miles of shoreline. Every day, my constituents, they feel the impacts of flooding. Take, for instance, Matthews County, one of the smallest localities in the Commonwealth with 9,000 people in the county. They have lost $65 million in their tax base, in real estate values, in their last reassessment. And that really affects the tax base. It affects how government's funded, how schools are funded, police, and fire. So we need to really start to look at that as well. Now, one thing I'd like to talk about is Chesapeake Bay Act. Chesapeake Bay Act, it's the signature water quality protection legislation, and it dates back to the late 1980s. At that time, and even today, it's needed, and it's responsible for significant improvements that have been made over time to clean up our most important waterways on the East Coast. Now, a large part of that act, it regulated the riparian areas, generally where the tidal wetlands and those upland areas converge. It was written to protect those natural spaces around our waterways and prevent overdevelopment and also protect water quality. Now, a great deal of those areas, they're where people live. It's their yards. It's where their lives are. It's where they grill out. It's their homes. It's where they're seeing flooding. And in this area where people live, it's where we're seeing layers upon layers of government regulations. And actually, we've identified 23 laws and regulatory programs just dealing with water quality, water resource management. But there's a disconnect between where those laws are, those laws that really prevent or can be obstacles to resiliency efforts, and where people live. But it's important to note that when these laws were crafted and they were created, they were intended to manage water flowing downhill. They never envisioned water rising and water coming up. So these laws and these regulatory programs, it's a challenge to work through them. They need to be modified. They need to be overhauled, and they need to work with these resiliency efforts. Now, it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge to educate legislators in Richmond, and oftentimes even the agencies to understand these problems. Because what has happened over these 30 years, the RPA area, the folks in Richmond really look at this area as being a pristine area. And I always like to say where unicorns and elves live, but it's not. It's where people live, and it's where their challenges. And it's not this magical place. And to tell you honestly, it's very difficult to get a legislator, especially in an urban area, to understand these complex problems that we're dealing with each and every day in only a few minutes presenting a bill before committee. Now, I've made numerous attempts over the years to bring awareness through legislation on this issue. One good thing I will tell you in working through this is DEQ has really finally acknowledged that this really is a problem, and they are actually working to develop mitigation approaches that can balance water quality, protect land, and also protect the tax base. Now, one big problem we have here in the Middle Peninsula is flooded septic systems. And it's not good when the Middle Peninsula is known on the East Coast as the land of failed septic systems. Just in Gloucester County, there are 600 systems that are affected by sunny day flooding, where we just have a king tide. And it happens quite often. And these systems are failing. And it's not only an environmental crisis, but also potentially is a huge public health crisis, But unfortunately, because no one has come up with real solutions, and because of the laws and the Chesapeake Bay Acts and being able to do anything in that RPA, no solutions are being brought forward. So anyone on here today, I challenge you, please step forward and try to come up with some type of solution to help mitigate these problems. Now, my approach always has been for legislative resiliency is to look at a building block approach, building a foundation each year that requires session after session to slowly make meaningful progress. To tell you the work is not easy, but we all know the problems are real and they need real solutions. So, every attempt, we do move the ball, we further those discussions, but the balls are falling short, but we are slowly making some progress. And when we make progress, it's about finding a balance between managing really what Mother Nature provides, so sun and solar, or say for flooding, water and flooding. And we manage that against the problems while also looking at challenges and also look at opportunities as we do this. And anything that I've ever put forward in any legislation, proposed solutions must always balance the protection of our natural resources. Water quality always is the first thing I look at. And we balance that against the challenge or the policy issue that we presented. One thing I don't do either is politicize this. We cannot get political when we move forward with solutions. We need to keep the politics out. We need to look at science, and we need to look at real solutions. Now, two pieces of legislation I'd really like to talk about. One is living shorelines that I passed this past session. Everyone loves a good living shoreline project, but most living shorelines in our rural areas, they're privately owned. These shorelines and the houses, they're a tax base. They have value when you build them. And our schools, our public safety, if you increase that property value, you're increasing that tax base and you're protecting the property at the same time. But if we're not designing these living shorelines to withstand tomorrow's storm, are we doing the right thing? Or we're not protecting our tax base really if we don't do that. So I modified the definition of living shorelines. It was actually a fairly simple bill in House Bill 1375 to include coastal resilience and attenuation of wave energy and storm surge. This was done to really force the conversation about how we design these living shorelines for tomorrow's storms and tomorrow's resiliency problems. And because of this legislation, the Middle Peninsula citizens, they can now gain access to funding and design services to really up design for tomorrow's challenge. Now, I'm going to completely shift gears a little bit and talk about something totally different, and that's solar. You mentioned it, initially, Elizabeth, solar. Solar has become a statewide priority and really a commitment, and folks look at it as a commitment to provide clean energy. Now, who benefits from this clean energy? And when we really stop to think about it, it's the urban areas. And it's the urban areas that are purchasing this electricity from these solar facilities in our rural localities. And when we look at it, it's at the expense of our rural localities. Prime agricultural farms, they're being converted into solar facilities. One project, 8 agriculture-related jobs totally disappear. Now, if you take the population of this locality, those 8 jobs are equivalent to 1,600 jobs in Fairfax. And if 1,600 jobs went away in Fairfax County, people would really start to look. You also have thousands of jobs being created, many of them with 6-figure salaries, but yet we're losing jobs and losing prime agriculture jobs in these rural, economically distressed areas. Now, also, many of these solar farms are being built right up to the floodplain. So with sea level rise, the potential for flooding exists with solar farms. So you have copper, cadmium, tellurite chemicals, and these rural areas would have to deal with it. And a huge challenge also is our local governments are not being compensated adequately. So through a collaborative and successful legislative process, I was able to get House Bill 1675 passed, which actually is a very important tool for our rural localities to be resilient and adapting to these challenges that solar facilities can bring. So what this does is it actually authorizes the development of or using what we call host siting agreements between the solar facility and the locality. Now, a host host agreement is a negotiated agreement between the solar facility and the locality where that actually governs that operation. So a locality has the flexibility to request mitigation of the impacts. For instance, capital improvement plan. Anything in the capital improvement plan mitigation can occur through that or locality's fiscal budget, or a locality can ask for assistance in the deployment of broadband. This has been very, very well received. So the bill went into effect July 1st, 2020, and to tell you honestly, it's taken off like wildfire. In just 3 months, this is what we've already seen in our rural economically deprived areas through negotiating their siting agreement. $4.2 million dedicated for broadband deployment, $150,000 towards construction of a new cell tower, $100,000 towards enhanced 911 emergency radio communications, $250,000 towards new emergency vehicles and capital improvements, $125,000 for renovation and modernization of existing volunteer fire station, $250,000 for establishment of a second EMS facility, $80,000 to hire a consultant to rewrite comp plan, $225,000 to develop pedestrian trails, which actually can be used for a grant match. And when you think back to broadband, you can also get matching funds through the VATI process as well. Total value of the siting agreements in just the 3 months, $20 million. $20 million. So really this legislation is resiliency at its best. So I thought it'd be fitting to talk about that today. It's also real quick, it's also an environmental justice issue. So when we think about environmental justice, that's the fair and equitable distribution of environmental policy. So what do we have here? Environmental justice with solar farms and what it's doing to our rural localities. So through this bill, we were able to bring environmental justice and make it fair and equitable. But you can also apply this to septic as well, because our hands are tied to be able to fix these problems. And you can also tie that to flooding in these rural economically distressed areas. So we need to start to look at environmental justice in a totally different way. So probably talked too long. So thank you for listening. I can keep going on and on, but
Well, thank you.
appreciate everything. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I'm not going to pick on Senator Hanger first, because I picked on him first already. So I'll just follow up with a quick question to you, Delegate Hodges. You were talking about your solar legislation that provides for revenue for these rural localities from these solar farms located in opportunity zones. And you noted that the revenue can be used for broadband, which is in and of itself a resilience measure, right? But also things that are set forth in the locality's capital improvement plan or current fiscal budget or fiscal fund balancing policy. How do we help localities and their residents to see the need to spend some of this revenue on resilience projects when they're facing pandemic issues, they're facing schools, roads, et cetera?
And that's a very good question. We'll need to talk with boards of supervisors as well to really start to look at the needs in the future and how flooding is affecting their tax base. And if we can really educate them on how it's affecting their tax base, then they'll really start to look at resiliency projects, and these solar farms can help with those resiliency projects.
Thank you. Okay. All right, Delegate Converse-Fowler, you hit a nerve with the realty issue, the disclosures. So I'm going to back up and scroll up and ask you a few questions. First of all, no, that's a farmland one. As a Norfolk resident, and he did note that you may have answered this already, but I'm going to read a couple of these to you, and so you can answer them all at the same time. As a Norfolk resident in a historic neighborhood, how will sea level rise affect flood insurance over the next 10 to 15 years? That's a good big question. Another question from our friends at the Northern Neck Planning District Commission. The NNPDC administers a program to elevate homes out of the floodplain, and even they have difficulty getting floodplain information for prospective applicants. This lack of information seems very deliberate. What can be done to allow administrators of such programs to have access to the floodplain and repetitive loss information? Do you know why there was a pushback from the realtors? Seems like a reasonable open discussion and factual required information. I think if that information is withheld, it ought to void the contract. And then what was the position of the Department of Conservation and Recreation regarding the disclosure? Could DCR be more helpful in disseminating this information? And perhaps it's easier to just send folks to the Virginia Flood Information System, which uses FEMA data. And perhaps Secretary Strickler could address the DCR question better when he speaks. And then what can we do to help convince the real estate industry to support prominent disclosure of houses being in flood zones?
Okay, well, that's a lot of questions.
That's a lot. That's a
Yeah,
lot.
no, absolutely. I think that it would be helpful to mention that DCR was very supportive of the bill and helped, push it along, and so was the administration. And so when we talk about those efforts, we really need to look at things holistically. When we step back and we say, okay, we need this information and why it's hard for localities to even get the floodplain information and why it doesn't make sense. I mean, you have to almost be trained on how to read these maps in order to interpret what you're looking at. And it's not as easy as just you're in a flood zone or you're not, because we're all technically in a flood zone. What zone you're in and what risk you're in is what matters. Now, in real estate terms, we look at X means you're not in a no risk, the lowest risk. How about that, of flooding? Then you have X500, you have, but when you start seeing AE is when you start getting concerned. Anything other than X in the real estate world is, concerning. And, my agents, we are all trained. We're very sensitive to this, where we are checking houses as they come up if it's in a flood zone to factor in not only the payment, but do you want, it's up to the buyer or the renter if they want to live and have that risk. So we're making sure we have that information. We are, but there's no requirement to by anyone. So instead of putting that on the agent, the bill, the attempt was to go ahead and get that put on the seller, just like air, noise, and aircraft crash zones, same effort. Now, the realtors did have a lot of pushback because the consensus is basically been for a long time, buyer beware. So go find out, you have to go figure that out yourself. Now, there's been little things here and there where they've said, no, if you know about this, you have to tell it. Like a methamphetamine lab that is currently in our code. If you know that your house has been previously used as a methamphetamine lab, you have to disclose that. So that's a very interesting, very specific thing that if you know about, you have to disclose it on a separate disclosure document. I've never seen the document because I've never known any buyer or seller that's ever disclosed that. But if you have to disclose your flood zone, that seems pretty easy. I think that to get the realtors involved, we need to have a big push. I mean, everybody needs to be on board. I think we could work on this in a bipartisan fashion. We could sit down and really kind of analyze how we get this accomplished. How you get the flood information, zone information, because when you go to look for it on the FEMA site, it's already very confusing and localities are having the issue. If it was readily available, like the noise zones and the crash zones, I think it would be better. So we really kind of have to go to the top. And we could probably work with the American Flood Coalition on this. I don't mean to be long-winded, but we could probably work with the American Flood Coalition. Let's get this kind of like looking at the federal, state, local level. How is that information presented? Is there a way to do it where it transfers to the state and how that gets transferred to the locality? And then maybe the realtors, we could get them on board better. But we have to have a very clear package for them, like where this is how it's done. This is where it would be. And this is how you would get the information, because right now the information isn't even readily accessible.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, we got a note from Circe Gonzalez with the CB program, and she's asking, might real estate agents be receptive to training that would allow them to translate flood maps, data, et cetera?
Absolutely. That's a good approach that I hadn't thought about. Perhaps that could be something that would require for continuing education for agents. We could add that into, as something, it could be suggestive, or we could request that be a requirement. But again, we would need to make sure there is a training available to make sure that information is out there. But then you're also putting it back on the agent, which I have no problem with, because we do have a responsibility to our clients, but that might be an issue. But putting it back on the seller creates this kind of system where everyone has to be on the same page to make sure the seller can provide that information, just like the air noise. And I just can't emphasize enough. And maybe in the future, I could provide, the information on what that looks like, because I think if you look at how those disclosures are, they're already written, they're already there. Each locality has their map already. And this is just a given. If we could get to that place where here's what the disclosure would like, let's model it after the, we call it ACUs. So every time I have to say it out, it's a little bit longer. But if we model it after the ACUs and then say, this is how the localities would provide the maps, then we'd be great.
Thank you. And I want to back up. Delegate Hodges, we have a question for you from a colleague in the engineering community. He said, I may have missed this, but what are the chief reasons for the loss of the $65 million in property values in Matthews County? Was it septic flooding? What's driving the problem? Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. I mean, Matthews is very low, probably, yeah, the lowest in the state. You have 80% of Matthews County is either tidal or non-tidal wetlands. So trying to develop solutions in these areas is a huge challenge. And what we're finding is people are walking away from their properties because their hands are tied to be able to even do anything. I mean, you're familiar with the Public Access Authority. We have a number of properties that are donated to the Public Access Authority. Gosh, I forgot how many properties, and a number of those are because people just don't want to deal with the challenges or because their hands are tied to be able to do anything. I'm not saying it's, right or wrong, but there are a number of challenges and we have to find solutions. I do know, and I do believe that DEQ, and I think the secretary's on here, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that DEQ will release regulations for public comment, and you probably know, Elizabeth, as well, I believe as early as next week, for public comment of what you can do in the RPA, possibly with, through elevation or doing some other things, because they're realizing there are some problems and we do need real solutions. But that's primarily the main reason is people are walking away because they're getting very tired, and that's happening everywhere. And we have properties that have been donated to the Access Authority in every locality across the Middle Peninsula. I believe there are 52 properties now. So we have all of this property for public access, but no funding to be able to do anything or to manage the property. So that's a challenge as well.
And I do want to note that Senator Lewis, I mentioned earlier, he had a family emergency today, so that's why he has not joined us. And I know our thoughts are with him on that. So Senator Hanger, let's loop you in. You're having too much fun sitting back and watching everybody else answer questions. So we had a question in the box for you, a couple of them. Let me back up and get those. What is behind Virginia's loss of farmland? Is it entirely development on the land, or are there more things at play? And another person asked, I'm seeing a real conflict between conserving farmland and forest land and building solar farms. Do you have thoughts about that? Okay.
Yeah, a couple important questions there. On the farmland loss, there are a lot of pressures particularly in the northern part of my district. There is a lot of pressure for development, and we're seeing it here in the valley as well, where people want a place to live. Even with this COVID environment we're in right now, we're seeing a lot of people interested in moving out into the country. And of course, if enough people move out into the country, it won't be country anymore, will it? It'll be urban. But so there is, we have obviously the land is a scarce commodity. I'm also involved in real estate, so I see that firsthand. Like Delegate Fowler, I'm a broker, own a small real estate company here in the valley. In fact, Delegate Fowler, I had one transaction down in Norfolk last year on East Beach. So we're small, but get around a little bit. And backing to that issue just a bit, all that stuff is disclosed in those things, but it's all a lot of information. And so you have to walk the buyer through there to be helpful for all of those conditions. Specifically on farming, it's tough. Like dairy farming as an example. Loudoun County used to be full of dairy farms. Now it's full of lots and lots of people that came from somewhere. It's been one of the things that it's kind of an uphill struggle we've had with our water quality goals for the Bay program and for other programs throughout the state, particularly if we look at the Chesapeake Bay drainage area as an example. While in the roughly 10 years that we were working from 2000 to 2010 to meet our goals for the 2010 program, if you look at Northern Virginia, Southern Maryland, DC, about 2 million additional people found themselves living in that region while we were working on reaching those goals. So it's an uphill climb. That growth has contributed to pressure on farmland preservation and the economics of farming. Dairy farming is a good example of that, where it's tough to make a living in dairy farming these days. There's been a transition there where the farmers just had it. The economics of it are pretty tough, and we've had to work on programs. We need to work on more programs for farmland transition. The second question there was, Elizabeth, if I could focus on that.
I'm going to scroll back up. Give me 1 second. Okay. This person said they're seeing a real conflict between conserving farmland and forest land and building solar farms. Do you have thoughts?
Solar farms, right? That is a debate that's ongoing now. We've seen it in certain areas, and I think that the consensus is, from local governing bodies, that they would prefer to keep the farmland. And so in Augusta County, there was a big battle over that last year. And I know in other parts of the state there have been. But as we look at that, there are areas that are not as productive for agricultural use, areas particularly in Southwest Virginia. There are areas there where these facilities can be sited. And I think local governing bodies are struggling with that. And we in the legislature are struggling with appropriate policy, not to devalue and inhibit solar growth, but to channel it into appropriate areas, particularly when subsidies are involved.
Another question for you, Senator Hanger. What is the status of project that is promoting climate credits for forests? This was started in the Rappahannock River Basin Commission area and has now expanded to other areas. I think she's talking about the Healthy Watersheds Initiative.
Healthy Watershed. Actually, I'm probably not a good as far as the exact status of that. Here, one of the things that I'm focused on and will be focusing more on in this upcoming session in terms of watersheds are resource management plans. And in that, it's not strictly, a lot of the focus that we get on agriculture, but one of the things, and I think this is very applicable to Eastern Virginia, into the more urban areas in Northern Virginia as well, is that we need more focus on urban best management practices. We're finding that when you really get down to it, those problems are some of the biggest problems we're confronted with in our healthy ecosystem as we work on that. The problem, of course, is they're the most expensive to fix. We were able to fix our point source pollution problems for the most part. There's still some issues out there with roughly $1 billion contribution from the state and another $1 billion from local governments. And the same for agriculture best management practices. We've expended over $1 billion over the last number of years for incentive programs. But when you look at urban areas, we're talking about 10 to 12 billion, and that's just a guesstimate of what it would cost to actually deal with some of those issues there. So cooperatively, we need to work on it. It has to be a bipartisan effort, and no one can point the finger at someone else because we're all a part of the problem. So we're all going to have to be a part of the solution.
Thank you. Yes, Delegate Hodges, you're on mute.
Yeah, can I follow up on the Healthy Watershed if you don't mind? I know Senator Hanger worked very closely with me, but I actually carried the bill in 2019, I believe. So through the Rappahannock River Basin Commission, we basically were able to tie in the value of forestry, water quality, air quality through the carbon that's actually sequestered in our trees. Thing is, every time a plane lands in Dallas, they need to be carbon neutral and they need to offset. So they actually have to purchase carbon credits. As is purchasing those carbon credits in Virginia, how do you get those to the individual landowner? Because these large equity firms, they want to strike one check and no less than $50 million. So through my legislation, it allows through the locality, through the IDA process, for them, through IDAs, for landowners to be able to basically link their land together. Okay, so for one check. That is actually moving forward. We have pilot programs moving forward in Essex and Orange County as we speak. So that's where we are right now.
Thank you. And I know Denise Nelson noted in the Q&A box that the pilot testing for healthy watersheds has been held up due to COVID, like everything else in the world, unfortunately. Flexibility is key. Delegate Converse Fowler, I wanted to note that an attendee suggested that perhaps flood zone information could be added as a layer in locality GIS systems, so it would be easier to find. I thought that was an interesting suggestion. For Delegate Hodges, our colleagues at VIMS had a question for you. Living shorelines are a preferred practice for balancing erosion protection and public trust services. They're designed to attenuate waves, but not necessarily flooding. Does conflating flooding protection with living shorelines create the likelihood that folks will opt out if they lack belief in flooding protection provision or lead to over-designed treatments that preclude wetlands and natural shoreline habitats persistence and limited ecological services? That's a long question. And you're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah, I don't believe so. Yeah, I don't believe so. I mean, I think we can move forward. I mean, living shorelines, you know, done in the right place, they can definitely help with flooding. And the folks that design and do these, we need to understand that, and the landowners. You know, I'm actually working on a project now, and you know, it's doing both, and I think we can do that. And the thing is you know, living shorelines, you know, Admiral Phillips talked about, you know, a retreat, or you know, an organized retreat. I'm not sure it's her exact language. But what can we do now to at least buy time? And as a realtor, Delegate Converse Fowler, when someone purchases a home, to buy that time, at least through the length of that mortgage over the next 30 years until we can figure this out, we have to find solutions to be able to do that, or we're going to continue to lose property values. So, you know, at least look at the next 30 years and what to do until we can figure it out.
Thank you. And on that note, I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to end. I did have one more question for Delegate Converse Fowler about the piece that was on NPR yesterday, featuring, unfortunately, a Virginia Beach resident. We don't want that kind of publicity, about the problem with the lack of flood disclosures. And so, you know, one thing that we always wonder about is, as we do plan for strategic planned retreat, as Delegate Hodges just mentioned in some areas, you know, how do we overcome that impact, that greater impact on our low-income communities? And how do we ensure that there's safe, dry housing that's affordable to them if we do move out of flooding areas?
No, I think that's a really good question. I think this is where that key piece to everything is flood zone disclosure is just one piece of this problem that we need to look at resiliency in general in the state, and we need to really come up with a plan, like a bigger plan. We could be a work in progress on certain areas where we're like, all right, well, so we're dealing with disclosures in this area, we're dealing with the retreat. How are we approaching this? We just don't have an overall plan. And Delegate Hodges, you just talked about in 30 years, you know, what are we planning for? I think we need that on paper. I think we need to use the joint subcommittee that we both serve on. I think we need to use that committee to really guide the state and how we move forward with resiliency. We need to make sure that we have a holistic picture, that we can bring all the stakeholders to the table, because it's a big plan. It's a huge plan. And I know we're all kind of working in our areas, our specialty areas, and with our localities and our districts and working like in that aspect. But, you know, a lot of it's been done in a vacuum, and we need to bring to the table, just like the suggestion about the GIS, the mapping. I think that's a great suggestion. Let's look into that. Let's figure out how we can do that. And I think we're starting to get there. And that holistic plan is kind of exciting to think about. And I think we're headed in that direction. So I think that will help putting all the pieces together. We can't just work in a vacuum with each of these issues. Retreat and disclosures, those are all things that are going to have to be dealt with together.
All tied together. Thank you. Well, thank you to all of our panelists for your flexibility, for your participation, for your wonderful comments and insights. Thank you. We really appreciate it. I'm going to move on to Secretary Strickler. I will note in the chat box, we posted some links to some VCPC reports. VCPC could not put on these conferences or do these reports without our colleagues that support us at the law school, at VIMS, at Virginia Sea Grant, and at Virginia Environmental Endowment that's been with us since we opened the doors. So I want to thank them for that as well. Secretary Strickler is up next. Thank you for joining us, Secretary Strickler. He is both the Secretary of Natural Resources and the Chief Resilience Officer for the Commonwealth. So in addition to overseeing the Commonwealth's natural resource agencies, he spearheads the Northam administration's notable resilience efforts, including the implementation of the governor's executive orders on these topics. And he's spoken here at our conference before. We appreciate your support and participation and looking forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.
Well, good morning, Elizabeth, and thank you so much for the kind introduction and for finding a creative way to continue this important forum despite the pandemic. Thanks also to our General Assembly leaders on this topic. It's great to see all of you. I heard Speaker Filler Corn earlier and certainly enjoyed the conversation that we just had on the last panel. Admiral Phillips has given everyone an overview of the Commonwealth's progress under Governor Northam in building coastal resilience and improving flood protection. And you'll hear from the governor himself shortly. As a matter of fact, he should be with us in a couple minutes, and I will certainly give way to him when he joins. There he is. I was gonna give a few remarks, but now that we have the governor, I know he has limited time, so we'll have to, I think, probably save what I had for another day. But just know that we're working very hard to implement the things that the legislators just mentioned. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative will be joining RGGI as a full participant the first of the year, and we'll have our first RGGI auction in March, which will bring in revenue to capitalize the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, which will be the way that we're able at the state level to put some skin in the game as far as helping with coastal resilience. And certainly you heard the speaker talk about the legislation on living shorelines and wetlands and strengthening those requirements at VMRC, as well as building coastal resilience into our Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act through DEQ regulations. And both of those processes are underway. There's been a lot of public outreach and good conversation from the agencies and with community partners, and look forward to getting down the road with those initiatives as well. But we've got the governor on, so I will just say thank you, Governor, for joining us today, and certainly thank you for your leadership and desire to really see Virginia take the next step and be a real leader, the leader, I think, on the East Coast in coastal resilience. We've got a lot of good work going on and under the executive orders, and certainly more to come when we work towards getting our coastal master planning framework out. So I will turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Matt, and good afternoon to all of you. I especially thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. I wish we could be together in person, but of course that is not possible right now. I'm always keeping an eye on our health numbers and our percent positivity, which is now around 5%. It was actually 4.8% today, but I continue to urge everyone to continue to follow the guidelines, wearing a mask, washing your hands, avoiding large crowds, so that we can do everything possible to put this pandemic behind us. I'd also like to offer special thanks to William and Mary and to Elizabeth Andrews and the Coastal Policy Center for hosting this important summit. I want to also give credit where credit's due to our Secretary of Natural Resources, Matt Strickler. Matt and I go back a long ways. We worked on a lot of issues back when I was in the Senate. He was my legislative aide. But Matt, to you and your staff, thank you so much for all the great work that you're doing. You make us proud to be Virginians. I'd also like to thank Admiral Ann Phillips. She took on a new position to really deal with coastal adaptation and resiliency, and has really hit the ground running. And so, Ann, thank you for your leadership and all your hard work. I know we have some legislators with us today. This has been a busy time for you all. I know you just finished a special session, and I appreciate all that you do for Virginia. I believe our speaker, Eileen Filler Corn, is either with us or will be. Emmett Hanger, Senator Hanger, has just been a real leader in our environmental issues. Linwood Lewis from 757 over on the Eastern Shore and Hampton Roads. Lynn, thanks for all that you do. I see my friend from Matthews County, Delegate Keith Hodges. Keith, it's been a pleasure working with you, and thanks for all that you do. And I also see my friend from Virginia Beach, Kelly Converse Fowler. And there may be others that I apologize if I didn't recognize everybody, but we're blessed in Virginia to have 140 just really great, talented, hardworking legislators. And so on behalf of Virginia, I say thank you. We all know that climate change is raising the stakes for everyone, but especially for those along our coast. As a native of Virginia's Eastern Shore, I know how much people living in rural coastal areas depend on the water. And I know what it means to respect and fear the water when conditions turn dangerous. I've seen firsthand the changes from sea level rise and land subsidence. It is a stark reminder of how fragile that balance is. Living most of my adult life in Norfolk and Virginia Beach, I grew acutely aware of the challenges that cities face in living with water. It is difficult and expensive to address the flooding, storm surge, and extreme weather that has become all too frequent. But whether you live in the city or out in the country, there are two undeniable truths. Flooding, sea level rise, and weather events are becoming more extreme and destructive every year. And they will only continue to get worse unless we take decisive action. Virginia has the highest rate of sea level rise of any East Coast state. If you don't believe me, go to Tangier Island and talk to the people of what sea level rise and subsidence means to them. Every day, billions of dollars in private property and public infrastructure are at risk from flooding. In 2018 and 2019 alone, Virginia saw $1.6 billion in damages from major flooding events. Sea level rise, flooding, and water damage are not unusual anymore. Now they're the norm. And science tells us that this trend will only get worse. So we can expect more severe weather and more dramatic increases in coastal flooding. This is likely even if we take extreme action to reduce carbon emissions. That's why our administration will continue to take bold steps to improve coastal resilience to these threats and to ensure that Virginia is a national leader. So 2 years ago at this conference, I signed Executive Order 24, designed to increase Virginia's resilience to sea level rise and natural hazards. It has served as a roadmap to make Virginia's environment more resilient to floods and other extreme weather events. We've reviewed our dam and floodplain safety programs and identified areas for improvement. We've identified wetlands and other natural areas for conservation using our Conserve Virginia model. And we have created the most ambitious freeboard standard for state-owned buildings in the nation. Our state agencies are working to create development standards that comply with the National Flood Insurance Program. This coming January, Virginia will formally join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, often referred to as RGGI. This will significantly reduce carbon emissions in the Commonwealth and will provide a significant investment in resilience. RGGI proceeds will generate roughly $500 million over the next 10 years for resilience upgrades and investments. So I want to take this opportunity to thank the General Assembly for working with us on coastal resilience issues and for agreeing that this is a significant concern. In the coming days, I will make an historic announcement regarding our progress towards a coastal resilience master plan. The announcement will detail the path forward for a holistic approach to resilience in Virginia. So I hope you will all join me for those exciting updates. We are fortunate that the Coastal Policy Center, along with many local governments, academic institutions, and dedicated individuals, is focused on addressing these threats to public safety and economic prosperity. But they cannot do it alone. With so much at risk, we must take strong actions now. Our administration has and will continue to do just that. Sea level rise natural hazards, and climate change represent an existential threat that will only be solved by facing our challenges head on. So with your help, we'll have a safe and resilient Commonwealth. And in closing, I just thank all of you that have been part of this conference over the years. I've always enjoyed being with you. And Pam, my wife, sends her regards. As you know, she is very committed and interested in our environment, and especially the coastal adaptation plans and the progress that we make. So in closing, thank you, and please stay safe and healthy. And I look forward to being with all of you in person soon. Take care.
Thank you, Governor Northam. We really appreciate you joining us and all the support that you give to our efforts with this conference and everything else. So we're glad to see you well and joining us. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you. Secretary Strickler, I don't know if you have time to finish up a couple of minutes of what you were saying earlier. Sorry to rush you there as we ran over a little bit.
No problem, Elizabeth. I'm happy to do that, or is it a better use of our time for me to take questions, or do we have time for both? I can do whatever makes sense.
It would be great if you'd be willing to take some questions. I'll look in here. One thing I know everyone has been concerned about is funding for the efforts that are undertaken by Admiral Phillips and others in your administration. So I don't know if you want to address that as part of the RGGI discussion.
Sure, I can talk about that first. So in the legislation that we passed General Assembly passed last year, the governor worked on to join RGGI. We dedicated 45% of the proceeds from our RGGI auctions to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. And so that's a statewide fund. It's not just focused on the coastal zone. We obviously have flooding problems, as you've heard today, in our inland and riverine systems that are very significant that we need to address. But we expect that's going to be about $500 million over the next 10 years. So while, putting things in perspective, we probably got tens of billions of dollars just in the coastal zone worth of resilience work we need to do. That's real money. It's not nothing, and it's certainly enough to help the Commonwealth, assist localities, assist the regions, particularly in Hampton Roads, rural coastal Virginia, and certainly in east of 95 in northern Virginia and around Richmond, to build resilience and incentivize some of the best practices that we know and that the science shows us. We'll do that at a low cost and an effective way that protects the environment while making our communities safer.
Thank you. And I want to quickly note that there are a couple of questions that I'm not able to get to the legislators because of time. So we'll make sure that they get a copy of all the Q&As so that they can see these. But for you, Secretary Strickler, actually there was a question. There's been some concern that part of the flood fund will include full-time employees for DCR. Can you speak to how many, how much, et cetera?
So with the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, we're focused on getting projects on the ground and assisting localities to do real substantive work that achieves the goal of flood protection. And so that's the number one objective there. At the same time, in order to administer a fund of this size and of this importance, we need to have a team that's capable of doing that, capable of evaluating projects, capable of getting resources out the door, administering a grant program. And we have some capacity at DCR to do that now. They're very familiar with similar programs, given that they administer the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation grants. But this is an order of magnitude more money, and a little bit more complicated as far as the engineering is concerned. So we'll have some assistance from the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program, which will be really helpful, and certainly we'll be leaning on outside experts and stakeholders, and you'll hear more about that when we get into our conversations about the Coastal Master Planning Framework, hopefully very shortly. But I think it's safe to say that we would like to judiciously use some of that funding to allow DCR to administer the grants program effectively and make sure that we're getting folks the assistance that they need to put these resilience projects on the ground.
And kind of a related question, what are your thoughts about establishing a permanent agency staff focused on climate resilience, and what might that look like? So a related question.
Well, I think one of the things that we've been really focused on is coordinating across Virginia state government, all of the different folks that work on projects and on programs that have a climate resilience and a climate change nexus. And Admiral Phillips has been very effective in doing that, working with our partners at Department of Transportation, at Department of Housing and Community Development, at DEQ, at DCR, and pulling all those folks together to kind of get everybody moving in the same direction. So we have a lot of capacity at the state level, certainly through the conservation cabinet that the governor established under Executive Order 22. We've enhanced our coordination on that and many other conservation related issues. So I think more than focusing on hiring a whole new team of staff to address this issue, I think we want to look and see how we can best utilize the capacity that we have, given the limited resources and the fact that we want to try to get projects on the ground.
And with that, thank you. We are at noon. So thank you to you, Secretary Strickler, and please pass on our thanks to the governor as well for his remarks. We really appreciate both of you coming, and to Admiral Phillips, and to all of our legislators, Senator Hanger, Delegate Hodges, Delegate Converse Fowler, so much for all of your comments and insights, and to everyone for attending. And again, we will post this on our website. So thank you, and stay well, everyone.
Thanks, Elizabeth.